Okay, so this will just be a quick one. This one is about the constitution of a SERPO, a self-regulating perpetual organisation. So if you don't know what that is, this podcast episode is probably not for you, but this is anyone that's into autonomous organisations and DAOs and things like that. This might be of interest. So a common question people ask, or that I seem to get asked, is, what is the future of a DAO? And I think, a DAO is really it's the evolution of an autonomous organization that's been spawned out of Web3 technology, I suppose. Whereas if you zoom out of Web3 for a moment and you look at the essence of an autonomous organization, it's got nothing to do with Web3. It's just an organization that operates autonomously. And so I'm viewing this from the perspective of we want to create a community-led organization that has a unified voice and is capable of operating within the formal economy, meaning, using statutory legislation, but it can protect its assets in perpetuity, as well as its constitution from being controlled or manipulated by a statutory regulation. Now, you still need regulation, and this is why I want to hone in on this, because you've got some people that are utilizing common law or DAOs to avert statute, to avert legislation, and you've got legislators utilizing legislation to try and impinge upon the common law or free will of a voice, a singular or a unified voice. And neither of those scenarios is ideal, but so you have to have a fusion of both. And so I'm going to explain this from that perspective, and utilizing the constitution of a SERPO, which is exactly that. A SERPO is what is called an unincorporated group. An unincorporated group. Lots of different organizations utilize this structure, such as political parties use it as well. So if you want to form a political party in New Zealand, for example, then you will create a group, and that group is an unincorporated group. But it is made of, the group consists of, its constituents consist of legal persons, but the group itself is unincorporated, and it has a group, it's unified in intent, and it has specific rules. And it's that simple, really. So a self-regulating perpetual organization is an unincorporated group. However, it's designed to infuse the unified voice of that group into a constitution, so a structure and a framework of governance, a unified intent of purpose, and rules, values. And, I always liken it to, it's similar to code. When you're writing code, software code, you have things called arguments. If this equals this, then that. If this is less than this, then that. And so it's what you want a constitution that is expressed by the unified voice of the group. I call it a body. And then it then sits there as a sovereign asset, a constitution. And it then declares specific rights, privileges, obligations that can be available to be delegated through the mechanism of delegated authority into two statutory entities, such as legal persons, incorporated trusts, incorporated companies, limited liability companies, that kind of thing. And it's that simple, really. Now, one of the major issues that DAOs have, digital autonomous organizations have, is that they're constituted, they're formed by legal persons. So you may be creating a common law constitution, or it may seem like you are, but your legal person being, which is the name on your birth certificate, which is, it is only bonded to the asset of your body, not actually your voice, is a statutory entity in itself. So if you form a DAO using your legal name, then it, through osmosis, it becomes a statutory entity. Now, this is, for legislators, this is the loophole that they really need to bring into, they need to illuminate it, because if a DAO is formed utilizing the natural persons, then there is no statutory entity. There is just a common law constitution with a unified voice, completely untouchable by statutory legislation, yet still powerful enough to employ agents from the formal economy, so statutory entities, to become agents and custodians of its will. And so this is the beauty and the power of a SERPO, a self-regulating perpetual organization. You have the voice, it's untouchable, it's immutable, completely sovereign. Its rights are immutable, unalienable. But that's only the will, it's only the voice. When it expresses its voice using the word, creates a constitution, delegates authority to agents on behalf to enact that will. And so this is where a SERPO separates out the enactment of the will into what we would call legislators. Someone to convert the analog signal of the voice into a digital form, being a statutory declaration. Now, it obviously, under statute, it can be a multitude of different things. But you empower the agent within, let's say, so with a SERPO, it's a charitable trust. And that charitable trust, as a separation of power, it is delegated the authority and the agency to enact the will of the voice, of the unified voice of the community. But it doesn't execute, it enacts. And so it legislates, for want of a better phrase, forms contracts, agreements that operate in the world of statute, that delegate authority to agents in the formal economy. Now, this common law, this charitable trust, it is obligated to the community, to the voice of the community. It is obligated to preserve and appreciate, protect, preserve, and appreciate the assets of the group that are in its possession, in its custody. So they are the custodians of the assets that are entrusted to the trust by the natural persons within the group community that has a unified voice. and they're obligated to protect, preserve, and appreciate those assets in perpetuity. And that's it. How they do it is up to them. And the will or the voice or the group cannot intervene in that party other than by amendments to their own constitution that can revoke authority, that can alter rules, that can change conditions. But there's no direct contact, so they can't go over and say, I want you to do it this way, or you need to do it this way. They can't control them. There's no control. There's no manipulation. There is just the expression of the voice and the expression of the will. And that the altering of the principal constitution is what determines the behaviour of the charitable trust, and then that cascades into the formal economy through delegated authority. So very important to have this separation of powers. And so with a SERPO, the charitable trust has two key functions. One of those is, well, it has multiple, and it will have multiple agencies like any government does. But the key umbrella functions are judicial, so third-party judicial, but they always are they're always arbitrating, handling disputes, reconciling, based on restitution of the asset, nothing to do with the human being. It's always about the asset, because they're bound to protect, preserve, and appreciate the asset. Now, I won't complicate it just yet, but the voice of the community, let's say it's a DAO, and they're natural persons, they have a unified voice, they can choose to transition custody of their physical vehicle of their physical body to the trust as well. But and the reason that's useful is for interventions. But I'm not going to complicate that for now. So this is how this works. And so let's say there's a dispute between the custodians of assets, and then it's joint arbitration, because the third party judicial function of the charitable trust represents the assets. And so the parties involved are people who have got entitlements to those assets. And so so from the perspective of the charitable trust, they are bound by obligation to protect and preserve both of those assets. So they're seeking the ideal way forward for everyone involved, always. And it's always protecting, preserving, and appreciating the assets under their stewardship. Now, this takes all of the emotion out of everything. It's all purely about the assets. So emotions don't come into it, all that kind of stuff. It's about how can we protect, preserve, and appreciate the assets. Sometimes they'll have to be reconstituted. Sometimes they'll have to be liquidated and dissolved. Sometimes they'll have to be bonded. But it's always about the asset. And then the other key component of the charitable trust is it acts as a treasury on behalf of the unincorporated group. That is the voice of the DAO, or the voice of the common law trust. Because they can't operate. If you if you assemble an unincorporated group using the natural persons, so it's all common law, there's nothing statutory involved, there's no mechanism for it to operate in the formal economy. Can't sign up for a bank account, can't sign up for a SaaS software product subscription. So it needs to employ, through the mechanism of agency, it needs to employ a third-party treasury. And so that's the other key role that the charitable trust plays. And it acts as a treasury for the unincorporated group. And so it has bank accounts, holds all the money on behalf of the group. And we've designed a software platform that utilizes a mechanism for, it basically uses NFTs as an alternative to, basically what happens is you, any form of asset, whether it's fiat currency or otherwise, intangible or tangible, is in the custody of the common law of the charitable trust, and then it produces NFTs, so digital constitutions that are statutory in nature, but also bound to the common law principal asset, and that replaces. So they hold the assets in reserve and then issue entitlements, obligations, privileges, using NFTs. And so how that manifests itself on the Powerhouse platform is that you have a digital wallet that contains an NFT that is neither a token or a currency, because it's just a contract. But nonetheless, we decide that it can be exchanged for either the original asset that's in the reserve or for fiat currency. And so this is the mechanism for a digital economy working with a treasury that utilizes full reserve banking instead of fractional reserve banking. And the issuing of NFTs, it's similar to how banking evolved in the beginning, from being, you go to the bank, you take something valuable to the bank, you say, you entrust it to them, can you look after this for me, please? Which is why banks were formed. And they'd give you a promissory note. You take the promissory note away, and so that you can come back at another time, hand the promissory note, and then collect your item. Let's say it's a bar of gold bullion. You get a promissory note for the bar of gold bullion, go back to the bank, exchange it for the gold bullion again. So the way banking evolved is you go to the bank, give them a bar of gold bullion, they give you a promissory note, and then people figured out, well, I can exchange the promissory note for goods and services. So I've got a note here that's promised by the bank that the custodian of this promissory note can exchange it for a bar of gold bullion. So instead what I do is, I want to buy a house. I'll give you this promissory note in exchange for this house. And so the custodian of that promissory note goes and collects the bar of gold bullion from the bank. So we're basically, I get comments about this that, this is so innovative, how you've come up with this. Well, this is exactly how banking started. It's not innovative at all. It's just common sense. The purpose of, blockchain is just technology to administer distributed authority. And to imbue trust into an electronic system. The purpose of a bank is trust. If I give this to you, I trust. If I give you my bar of gold bullion, I trust that you're going to keep it safe. And I also trust that if I go away and come back, you're going to give it back to me. And so it's safe, it's protected. You're going to protect it and preserve it. And of course, banks evolved to appreciate those assets as well. And we see that in terms of interest. So, sometimes the solutions, sometimes we've overcomplicated things and we need to go back to basics of why things exist. At the moment we have Web3 technology, we have blockchain technology, NFTs, smart contracts, distributed authority. And it's all become technology based instead of, how can we make the technology invisible and just make it work for us in terms of what's the ideal way to run a digital economy. And, we've got things now like mining, with the merge just happening of, Ethereum moving to proof of stake from proof of work. So, wiping out a whole bunch of people from the mining community. Well, it's less distributed now, because those miners, what they do is they act almost like banks. But, as producers of energy and ensuring that there is enough energy in the system at any one time. And so now, the potential for harnessing energy has been dissolved and will get absorbed back into the system now. And so then it's created more of a dependency on the individual, which is fine. But the ideal scenario is that there are nodes that evolve to free the dependency on the individual over time. And I call it consolidated distributed authority, CDA. So distributed authority is just perpetual fragmentation down to the individual layer. But consolidated distributed authority means that you perpetually allow the fragmentation to occur, but you also perpetually consolidate it into small nodes or groups. But it's never centralized into one group, other than being the entire thing being contained by a unified whole, which is exactly what a Serpo is. Excuse me. So that's the two components of a Serpo, and the third component is the formal economy, which is, so you've got the analog voice of we the people, an unincorporated group. It's under common law. Then you have a charitable trust, which is a bridge between both worlds. It's bonded through agency to the voice of the unincorporated group to enact the will of that group, and it constitutes statutory agreements with delegated authority, delegates entitlements, obligations, privileges to utilize the assets in its custodianship for XYZ, and then those are populated onto the Powerhouse marketplace as principal digital assets. That can then be, and then they can then be bonded to each other to form systems, and the custodians of the assets that are bonded together then form virtual teams that can actualize the potential of those assets by creating new ventures, new businesses. But what's beautiful about this mechanism is that you can target really fine niches, really defined niches, and by forming organizations based on the characteristics and the potential of an asset, then you're removing the human being out of it, and you're actually building systems that solve problems. And the human being actually just becomes an avatar, really. And what's, in this scenario, what you have is you don't have companies that are dependent upon any single human being. So if someone gets hit by a bus, then it's, the asset remains and can easily be delegated and wind up under the stewardship of someone who does have the expertise and skills required to be the custodian of that asset. Because every asset on that marketplace is under the stewardship of the charitable trust, if any of those assets begin stagnating, appreciating, or appreciating, then, it can flag an intervention. An intervention meaning, okay, let's bring in a third-party auditor to understand why this asset is stagnating. We might analyze the value chain, whatever we need to do to determine why an asset is appreciating, and then we can come together to reconstitute the organization in a specific way to negate that issue, or we can flag that an innovation project to happen to constitute a brand new asset to meet a currently unmet need that in turn will enable that stagnant asset, or maybe even depreciating asset, to begin appreciating again. So in this context, those three components, the voice or the will, an analog voice, then you have the enactment of that will by charitable trust, and then you have the fulfillment of the will by the formal economy, companies, companies and legal persons. So as a legal person, that's your physical body. That's the name on your birth certificate. And that's basically how it works. And in this scenario, it has not only do you have autonomous organizations that have immutable DNA and perpetually mutable form, they are impervious to statutory regulation because it's an unincorporated group. So it's just an avatar. However, the statutory legislation can influence the legal person who is empowered to actualize the potential of an asset. And so if they become stopped, if legislation stops their nature from arising in the way that it wants to, or the nature of the organization arising in the way that it wants to, then the will of the common law DAO or the common law trust or the unincorporated group can reconstitute. It can revoke authority that's been given to the charitable trust, and then that charitable trust loses the power that it gave that person who's now been blocked, and then that authority can be redelegated elsewhere. So you see, it's kind of like, with your body, if something happens in the external environment, let's say you get a cut on your finger, then the cells that were destroyed are gone. However, the body itself just provides it redelegates authority within the body to produce other cells to put there in its place, and they'll probably be the ones that are put in its place will be slightly different, a little bit stronger, a little bit more resilient, and the entire ecosystem operates in this way. extremely potent. And, this is why, once we bring this mechanism in, this is why it's so important that these organizations are brought through in collaboration with governments wherever possible, because that they're immutable and impervious to ever being stopped. And that includes the physical platform itself of Powerhouse. And the reason the Powerhouse platform is immutable is because the code base, the DNA, is perpetually updated and held within a common law constitution as a principal asset. And the marketplace itself is just an avatar. So we've designed it, architecturally speaking, in a way where everything that you interact with is an avatar, so it's just themed. And the theme sits with the company, Powerhouse, but the DNA sits with the common law trust, with the unincorporated group. And so if legislators stop the company, Powerhouse, for whatever reason, they want to stop it, they want to contain it, whatever happens, then the company Powerhouse is just stopped, and the themes that it owns go with it and are blocked. However, the code, which is the DNA, which is just words on paper, numbers and words on paper, it's an immutable asset. It's like DNA. Then the authority to utilize that DNA can just be delegated to another company, another legal person. And in truth, the code for the themes, long story short, you can reconstitute a company like Powerhouse. Let's say it's the size of Amazon at the time. You can reconstitute it in a matter of hours. So it is truly immutable. Can't stop it. And so, once this becomes more mainstream, when I say this, I mean autonomous organizations and, how the law actually works. And, once we start to see more and more constitutions and more contracts and agreements put in place that are purposefully utilizing common law as well as statute law in a hybrid fashion, it'll become much more normal for this kind of organization to emerge. So, that's pretty much it. That's the nature of the constitution of a SERPO, a self-regulating perpetual organization, immutable DNA and perpetually mutable form. Which means the will of the unincorporated group can never be stopped. It can be temporarily stopped, but it will always completely regenerate and continue on for all eternity. Such is the nature of sound, which is the voice. And the one last thing I'll say on this topic is that it works as an individual. So you can be a sole trader, like a single person, and you can run a company that you govern yourself as a SERPO as well. Because how it works is, instead of forming an unincorporated group, like a DAO, a common law DAO, you just form a common law trust, and you're the single voice, you're the only voice. And so you constitute a principal common law asset as a common law trust, as the natural human being, and then you delegate authority to the charitable trust, and you're the only voice. So it's completely dynamic, and from my perspective, and I would say this, I think it's probably one of the most potent and potentially disruptive technologies that we've ever seen. And I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by people who are beginning to understand this as well. So, very excited for what the future is going to look like with Serpos. And autonomous organizations as a whole, really. So, hopefully that made sense. That's it for now for the constitution of a Serpo. Cheers for now.